For today's topic, we're going to be covering constructive coaching for meaningful growth. Really starting with a few different slides focused on some stats. So I'm going to take it from two different lenses and start first with just kind of this general state of employee feedback, and then really getting into why constructive feedback matters. We'll introduce a few different types of constructive feedback and run through some different scenarios on when you might be using those different types, and then get into some different best practices to walk away with and how you can leverage Truvelop to have really strong, productive coaching conversations. So starting with just a few of these kind of basic stats around employee feedback, 96% of employees say getting regular feedback is a good thing. 32% of employees say they have to wait 3 months or more to receive feedback. 84% of employees who received feedback said they were engaged in their work. And managers who give just the right amount of feedback are the highest rated by employees. So bottom line, employees want feedback. They want a lot of it, but a lot of them aren't receiving it as often as they would like. Moving into why constructive feedback matters. So just 10% of employees say that they're engaged after receiving negative feedback. 75% of disengaged workers say poor relationships with management contribute to their lack of engagement. 80% of employees who receive negative feedback are either actively or passively looking for another job. And 75% of employees say they don't receive feedback frequently enough to improve their work performance. So there are a few major takeaways that I had from this. First of all, being that when we are delivering constructive feedback, we are not delivering it in a way that is impactful, meaningful, and receptive to the employees. Additionally, as people are sharing constructive feedback, it is actively disengaging the employee. So to me, that reads as it was definitely more reactive. It was not giving the opportunity for the employee to grow. And it was not delivered in a way that really was helpful, especially given that bottom stat of 75% of employees say they don't receive feedback frequently enough to improve their work performance. If we're delivering that feedback in the annual review and it happened 9 months ago, it's not going to matter anymore. And so, of course, employees are going to be frustrated by that and be like, okay, wow, I put in 12 months of great work and we're harping on something that happened so long ago that maybe is no longer relevant. So as far as constructive feedback today goes, there's a lot to be improved from that. So just kind of tossing this out to the group here, were there any of these stats from this slide or the previous slide that were surprising to you, or that you were kind of like, didn't expect that?
No, I feel like they were right on.
Yeah. Agreed. How comfortable would you say that how comfortable are you with delivering constructive feedback today on like a scale of 1 to 5? And I realize that we're all from First Financial here, so if we don't want to participate in this one, that's fine.
I think sometimes it depends on what the feedback is about.
Yeah.
I would say most of the time I'm okay, like a 9 or a 10. And when it's kind of, I don't know, whatever happened is weird, then it might be a 5, but I still do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Cindy. I mean, usually I don't have a problem with it, but yeah, it depends on what it's about. Sometimes it can be a difficult, conversation, but
Of
usually
course.
it's okay.
Yeah. Context definitely matters. Awesome. Well, we'll keep that in mind as we head into some of these different scenarios here. I wanted to keep it pretty basic and just kind of thinking about some different types of constructive feedback. So I just listed 3, and I picked 3 that actually line up perfectly with Truvelop's classification list. So we have our 3 examples with observations, coaching moments, and corrective actions. So observations are really just actions that you've noticed. I think you can deliver observational feedback in a way that's more exploratory. It's really not passing any judgment. It's just kind of making that note that there may be something to get ahead of in the future. And it's just that kind of pause to call out a behavior before it becomes that larger issue. I think observations can be a great way to stay proactive and really seek to understand your team members' thought process, while also inviting that collaboration to kind of share what they think is going well, why they did the action that they did, and also kind of just thinking, okay, are there other alternative actions and behaviors that we could be exploring? So for the example that I have here, I noticed that you seem a bit disengaged lately. Is there anything that I can do to help? Coming to work focused and engaged helps us to perform at our best. So I want to make sure that we're taking the right steps to help you feel inspired by your work. It's just taking a pause, saying, hey, I noticed this. Can I help in any way, shape, or form? Opening that conversation while also calling out that there's something that's less than ideal. For coaching moments, they are taking a learning moment and adding in a actionable next step to really drive that growth. It's a great way to encourage a growth mindset, offer that support, and also show the employee that this is a safe learning environment. So again, for our example, thanks for taking the time to review the SOPs for onboarding a client. By following each step, we can ensure strong adoption right away from the get-go. As you work towards strengthening your onboarding workflow, feel free to reach out with any questions. So this is taking a scenario where they clearly already talked one-on-one on what the kind of best behaviors are. And then also is giving the employee room to try it out, figure it out themselves, make a couple additional mistakes if they need to, so that they feel like they have control over their behaviors, that they have control over their learning experience, but they also have that support and guidance. They're not just on their own trying to figure out what's best. Finishing up with our last example here with corrective actions. These are really intended to correct or fix that behavior and can sometimes feel a bit trickier. So these are certainly less proactive than coaching or observations, and instead can be sometimes a bit reactive. So we're trying to fix behavior that has already occurred. So it can inherently feel less than ideal and maybe a bit more combative. With that said, corrective actions can also be extremely encouraging and supportive with the right tone. It's all about emphasizing the why and just reminding the employee that their impact matters. So for example, here, Larry, as discussed, let's ensure that we are taking proper notes after each meeting. Documentation is a key part of the sales process as it ensures we are always prepared and working towards a goal in each call. Looking forward to reviewing your notes next week. So there's a few pieces that I do want to call out with this example. First being that we're talking about what that behavior change is, really emphasizing the why, and then also setting time to follow up. Rather than just kind of sharing that feedback and then moving on, it's going to be an active conversation of, hey, here's why we're doing this. I want to make sure that you feel supported in this. Let's work together. It's not just fix this. You really kind of screwed this up. It's here's why. Let's make sure that we do this the right way. I want to help you be successful and reach that full potential. So I have a few different scenarios for us to kind of walk through and think back to which style of constructive feedback might be most appropriate or how you would apply it for each of these. So starting with scenario one, you have a new employee on your team and you notice that they aren't keeping the most professional tone in their emails and you want to adjust their language going forward. What kind of feedback would you apply and why?
Okay, I'll go. I hate the silence. I'm gonna say the corrective action.
Okay. Yeah, I think you could definitely use corrective action here. It could be, hey, instead of this word, try using this word instead. Here's why. Let me see if we can follow up on that next time. And so once they do swap out the language, saying, hey, I noticed that you did swap this out. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think also since it is a new employee, we could do observation or coaching, really use it as a learning moment, and just kind of explore, why did you feel comfortable enough to use the language that you did? Talk me through that. This is a professional environment. Here's what we typically use. But some of those are also kind of corrective action-y too. So even if it's just like, hey, I noticed that you used something silly in your sign-off signature, let's avoid that going forward, or just kind of leaving the space for them to say, yeah, I did. It was just internally, so I thought it was okay. And then you have a coaching moment from there. For our second scenario, this employee didn't follow up with the customer and it resulted in the loss of their business. You want to review the steps they took or failed to take and create a stronger plan of action going forward. What kind of feedback would you use and why? And I will call out that obviously the scenario is a bit more reactive versus proactive, but that doesn't necessarily rule any of them out either.
That seems more corrective because there's been an actual result of their lack of follow-up.
Yes.
And so it's really important to let them know what their failure caused and, how much it could affect business in the future.
100%. And really emphasizing the impact here and focusing on, going forward, here are those next steps, offering that support there. For our scenario 3, an employee showed up late to a meeting. This is not typical of them, and it's the first time that you've noticed this happening. What kind of feedback would you share, and would you share feedback at all?
I would probably talk to them, just a kind of an observation because it's not typical, and maybe something's going on that they would like to share, or maybe just something unforeseen came up and it's just a blip on the screen.
Yeah.
But it's probably worth having a conversation to make sure there's nothing bigger at play.
Definitely agreed. And I think observation is absolutely the most appropriate piece there, especially since it is the first time and it leaves that space to explore and really just check in more than anything else. Like you said, Diane. Awesome. And then we have our last scenario here. Your employee has failed to meet their KPIs for 3 quarters in a row, and you've been sharing some feedback along the way to help coach and guide them towards success, but they haven't been implementing the changes. What are your next steps and what kind of feedback can you use at this point?
So it appears it's just Cindy and I here.
Yes.
All right, well, I'll go again.
Okay.
I would say
I'll
I would
add.
corrective action, that they're not doing what they need to do. And it's very important that you get to the bottom of it because,
Yep.
you probably need to get them on some kind of a performance plan to try to make some changes so that they can make improvements and just see if there's something else at play that needs to be discussed.
100%. The 3 quarters is really what felt strong to me, is that it's time for that performance improvement plan. We've had those coaching moments. We've been passing our observations. It's time to get really kind of clear on these are the steps that need to be taken, or else we're going to have a different conversation, not in a threatening way, but just say, this is the reality. We've given you these opportunities and we've been not seeing some changes. So let's get to the bottom of this and get you back on track if we can. So again, I know it's just Diane and Cindy here, but I do just have some kind of more general questions. What kind of feedback do you tend to gravitate towards the most, observational, coaching, or corrective action? And why do you think you gravitate towards that?
Personally, I think probably coaching. For me, I'm not going to answer for Diane, but I feel like that's more my personality. Is just to try to want people to be the best they can be. And so when we can kind of look at something and talk it through, and then if, there are times when observations are needed, like you say, somebody shows up late and they never do that, or somebody is rude and they've never been rude before, that kind of tends to think, well, maybe something else is going on, and you just want to, reach out and let them know, that you're here, and just that you've noticed, but that if they, want to open up or anything, they can. And then just really trying to coach them to, like I say, be the best, at whatever they're trying to be the best at.
100%. Awesome.
I find myself often in situations where we're trying to work on corrective action. If
Mhm.
I supervise a lot of the branch personnel, and there's another supervisor between me and the branches. And actually, there's layers of it. And so a lot of times when I'm involved, it's because we feel like we have that pattern of problem, and we're trying to make corrections to get the person to turn around their behavior. So sometimes it's observation, but I think what I find myself faced with quite regularly is corrective action and trying to figure out how we can get them back on track.
That makes complete sense. Totally. Since it's just you two, I don't feel like we need to spend too much time on the second one. But if somebody is resistant to constructive feedback, kind of then what? What's been your go-to approach? What's really worked for you if somebody is not super open to some of those coaching moments?
I was gonna say, I'm gonna let Diane handle this because I feel like supervises a lot more people than I do. So I would love to hear some tips on this.
I don't know if I have any tips per se, but a lot of times when we don't see an improvement in behavior, we're working towards letting people go. That, we've done what we can. They don't seem like they really want to conform to what we're looking for. And then we end up taking steps to work towards telling them they're just not a good fit for us and sending them on their way.
And that's the reality. If we can't spend too much time on people who are not going to respond to that time and energy, that's not fair to the rest of the team. So making sure that we make those decisions promptly, while also giving employees every opportunity to improve, but we can't be dragging our feet through the water either, because then that could lead to additional turnover that is regrettable versus the non-regrettable there.
And what we see, I read this somewhere or in one of the supervisor things I've gone to, where you tend to lean on the people that are high performers,
Yep.
but you're actually alienating them by not trying to get the low performers to step up.
Yes.
So, it can be really detrimental if you let the behavior carry on.
100%. Great call out, Diane. So we are going to start wrapping up here. I'll leave us with some just kind of general best practices for delivering that constructive feedback. For the first one, just keeping any judgment out of the conversation. So really not trying to pass judgment on the why behind some of these behaviors, just seeking to understand instead. Offering support and encouragement when you can. So especially if there's a learning opportunity, really trying to drive that growth mindset. And helping the employee start to self-coach. So by asking some of these good reflection questions, by encouraging them to kind of problem solve as much as they can in a collaborative coaching moment, you're able to create long-term behaviors for growth and development. This one is the most important in my mind, is really spending time on the why. It isn't enough to just tell an employee what to do. Instead, really emphasizing the impact and reasoning for the requested change is a great way to get that employee buy-in, and also reminding the employee that their work does matter. They are on a team, they are contributing in individual role, but without that role, then other people are then impacted, or the rest of the organization is then impacted. So making sure that they understand that some of these smaller tasks that may be annoying, that maybe they don't want to spend the time on, are just as important as some of the bigger, more inspiring moments of the work. And then lastly, following up with praise. If you are seeing progress, making sure that we're celebrating it, putting that positive reinforcement into play, and just reminding the employees that you believe in their potential. And that's why you're sharing that feedback with them in the first place.
It's interesting, if I can interrupt.
Yes.
we had an employee who was kind of underperforming
Mhm.
and has been here for a while, and I wasn't directly responsible for the supervision early on. And the feedback I was getting, things I was seeing was just not producing as much as she should have or could have.
Mhm.
Anyway, at the end of the year when we did her evaluation, I was more um, direct with her and telling her that I thought she had a lot of potential, but that she wasn't living up to it.
Mhm.
And almost immediately, there was improvement in her performance. And in a one-on-one subsequent to that, she actually, thanked me for the honesty of letting her know that she could be more, do more. She just wasn't trying hard enough. So, um, sometimes it's really unnerving to have to face the people, but in the long run, a lot of times the outcome can be really positive, and you get to where you want, and the person actually appreciates the directness.
100%. Diane, that's a phenomenal example, especially it kind of ties in all the different types of feedback. It's observational, but also asking for more with that kind of corrective action tone. And I think that's a great way to kind of show the success story of when you take the time to lay out the expectations, to say, hey, I believe in your potential. That's why we're having this conversation. It just reminds employees that they are seen, they're valued, and their work's important. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
And then just some reminders for how Truvelop can play a role in these constructive feedback conversations. Sometimes it can be a little hard to open the conversation. I always think that the evaluation is a great place to start because it shows the kind of overall performance. So by starting with kind of, here's where you landed in our evaluation process. Here's what I think is going well. Here are some things that I think can be improved. It's a larger, kind of more holistic approach to that development conversation versus focusing on one specific action. With that said, definitely want to document those next steps with Spark to make sure that nothing gets lost during that conversation and that we do have that kind of clear plan of action going forward. And then also keeping that conversation going by seeking feedback with survey. So as you start to deliver additional feedback, seeing how your employees are responding to it, seeing if it's the right cadence, there is such a thing as too much feedback. So making sure that you're gauging that from your employees and just kind of showing that you also walk the walk and that you are open to feedback as well. So whether that survey is anonymous or not, nice way to just kind of open that dialogue and make sure that your employees know that it can be bi-directional. It's not just going to be top down. With that, that takes us to the end here. Diane and Cindy, thanks for playing along with me. I appreciated everything that you had to share and hope to see you again next month.
Thank you for the information. This was great.
Thank you.
you.